Good afternoon. I'm Emmitt House, and in the interest of using the rest of the time we have wisely, I'm just going to make a few remarks and then open up the discussion to the audience. And we've already got some people teed up at the microphones in the back there. And if anyone else wants to speak when I finish, you can just line up behind the microphones and we'll let you have a chance to say what you'd like to say. You know, over the last couple of days, we have heard a lot and learned a lot. One of the things that we've all can probably agree on is that there is a form of aggressive policing that is being practiced in almost exclusively in poor and black communities and here in Chicago. You know, our focus really ought to be on developing ways to prevent these practices. It's very important that we focus on the day-to-day interactions that black adolescent boys and girls have with the police. I mean, the purpose of this conference was to focus on young people and police, even though we've had to engage in a great deal of discussion about police practices in general and reform in police procedures. Our focus is still on the police and how they interact on a day-to-day basis with young adolescents. You know, and when these encounters are as negative as many of our kids have informed us that they are, it really produces a kind of fear-mongering and intimidation that's counterproductive and undermines all of our safety. The children are being exposed to violence from their peers, and at the same time, they're trapped in an environment where some of those who might be their protectors too often engage in the same type of gunplay and intimidation as the criminal elements. It doesn't matter that there are bad cops and there are good cops, or whether the bad cops are a minority or whether they're a majority, because almost all of our kids say that their day-to-day encounters with the police are negative. So that means that there is a reason to focus and address the bad cops and the negative experiences that these kids have. Now, these interactions are really almost elemental because they really set the stage for some of the horrific kinds of incidents that we hear about almost every day or every week now in the media. They also have a deleterious effect on the development of adolescence. We've had experts to talk about, you know, the psychic damage or the intellectual development that is impaired by kids who have to address stress and deal in stressful situations on the way to school and as they traverse their communities. So that, you know, we've come up with just a number of issues that I think bear additional discussion, as well as we've had some practical suggestions about how some of these things might be addressed. I'm just going to run through a few, and what I'd like for people here to do is to think about some of these things that we've already discussed or heard about, and we intend to create some kind of forum after this conference so that the ideas and the discussions that we've had don't stop here. For starters, we're going to do a post-conference paper that we're going to send around to all of you. I believe as part of the registration, your email addresses were collected. In addition to that, we'd also like each of you to think about and use whatever resources you have at your disposal to perhaps begin to address some of these micro issues or micro solutions on your own. For example, one of the things that the Invisible Institute does is to keep a database of police misconduct files here in Chicago. I think it would be easy for a number of you to go back to where you are and create databases, however small or narrow, about specific issues that exist as it pertains to young people and the police. You know, we've talked about things like police denial and encouraging basic honesty. We've talked about racism and how racism ought to be addressed as it pertains to these issues. We've got Howard's 4 words, brute force, corruption, nepotism, and corruption. I'm sorry, and racism, thank you. We've talked about how to set the stage for discussions of best practices. We've had the chief of police of Tampa who seems to have an approach to policing that is a little more progressive than we know exists in a lot of other cities. We've talked about how to increase safety in minority communities without necessarily having aggressive policing. We've talked about supporting and increasing the effectiveness of community groups and involving them in crime prevention and providing them with resources to promote that. We've talked about who should investigate the police and who should oversee the police departments. Talked about research, and I think there's an opportunity for scholars here to really share information about issues that they think ought to be researched more fully, or even areas that have never been researched that have some relevance to young people and their encounters with the police. You know, we've talked about a few things that are actually, I think, prescriptive solutions to police. I mean, the overall business of accountability and what accountability ought to look like is something that I think we can come up with ideas about that are very specific. Some of the things that have been thrown out are citizen complaints being taken seriously, for starters, and some kind of civilian review of police behavior, however broadly or narrowly that could be tailored. Here in Chicago, there's a requirement, for example, that police complete contact cards whenever there's an encounter with a citizen. Anecdotally, many of us believe that that's not done very often, and particularly in black communities and poor communities. Stops are made, people are engaged either negatively or otherwise, and the police just drive off, and there's not really a clear idea that they're always documented. There are the body cam issue is one that has a lot of hairs on it, but it's obviously one tool that could help us keep the police accountable and have and also serve the police in a lot of instances. We need to remove barriers to transparency. Again, the Invisible Institute's approach toward making public police complaint files is a technique that can help with some of that. We've talked a lot about investigating and weeding out the bad cops, even though there may be personnel and procedural due process issues pertaining to that, doesn't necessarily mean it doesn't have a solution. We've talked about the code of silence and how the code of silence basically ends up corrupting much of community policing or hands-on policing, or whatever you want to call it. If the police are not in a position, the good police are not in a position to come forward with even-handed and honest information, then we have a problem. So we need to find ways for the whistleblowers to be protected and to be encouraged. We need to be in a position to influence the leadership of our police departments. In Chicago, the mayor's office has complete control over who is selected as the police chief, and perhaps there ought to be some kind of citizen input into that process. We've talked about public education. One of the things that we do, of course, at Hyde Park Academy is to talk to the students and try and educate them about their civil rights, but at the same time temper that with the reality that all encounters and all police officers may not respect those rights. We need to also have some kind of education about police procedures and how things operate once a complaint is filed against a police officer, or the due process situations in individual police departments and how that impacts the speed at which information is distributed in the community, as well as results being obtained that are satisfactory to all concerned. We are in a position in many cases to obtain information from police departments and other civic repositories of information through freedom of information requests, so that we can educate ourselves about how to do freedom of information requests, as well as how to actually research information that's widely available that people may not even know about. We could also create repositories of scholarly information that centers around this one issue of young people and the police, so that it's easier for those of us who are interested in the topic to access that information. So that what I'd like for you to do is to go back and think about how you might make a contribution, and we're going to provide a means by which you can communicate that information back to us, and we can set up some kind of source for you to access information that everybody at the conference and others who might be interested have provided. So having said all of that, I'd like for people to come forward and either share ideas that you've not been able to thus far with the rest of the group, make suggestions about how we might refine this kind of conference and process and better achieve our goals, or anything else you'd like to talk about. So, Jackie, I think you've already got several people lined up, and let's go with it.
Well, thank you, Emmitt, and thank the law school here at the University of Chicago for thank you, Emmitt, and thank the law school here at the University of Chicago for inviting us out to speak about the youth, our young people, and the engagement that they have with the police departments, whether they be positive or negative. To that point, I think part of what the conversation sort of narrowed down to was trust. Trust was a major theme that I heard today between those in the community as well as the police officer, and the different dynamics within, or the paradigms within both those communities, where trust may be somewhat of a difficulty to overcome. With that being said, I've been doing some research on the county of Cook in particular, and if I'm correct with my analysis, we find that there's approximately 5.1 million people who reside in Cook County, making it the second largest county in the United States of America. What we also find, if we deep dive into the analytics of who resides on the south down to Matson and the west sides of the former Cook County, as I like to say, out to Oak Park, we noticed that there is a number of individuals that recorded at about 2.8 million people in that demographic. Mostly would be Latinos, African Americans, and Irish immigrants, all coalesced in the 2.8 million people within that community. The state of Illinois and Cook County also has on the record books, or the constitutional law aspect, a rule called the home rule, where communities as large as 25,000 or larger have the ability to create legislation, statutes, and/or acts that, as long as they do not supersede any federal or state law, they are enacted by the county. One example of this might be a sales tax on cigarettes or something of the like within the county, and it generates revenue. So I said all that to say what? I have, if you have time to go onto your Facebook, DuSable County, Illinois. If you are truly interested in social justice for your community, you will go on to DuSable County and try to bring voice to the concerns of the community. Why are the public schools being closed? Why does a certain demographic within a certain population on the south and the west sides not quite equal up to what we see on the north and the northwest sides of the community? Why is the employment issue of greater concern in some demographics? Those issues are being discussed and talked about. This community has the opportunity to help bring that voice. The University of Chicago is actually located on the south side of the city. Although it's an isolated paradigm within the south side, a lot of the power structure is actually located here. We would like to include you in that.
Excuse me.
Voice.
Yeah, we want to give everybody a chance to speak. You know, you first addressed the matter of trust. And I understand the Cook County situation and the demographics and resources that are available. What I'd like for you to do is to communicate with us once we set up a means by which people can communicate after the conference, ways in which you think we can establish practical approaches to increasing the trust among young people and police officers in the city of Chicago in particular, and perhaps anywhere else in the county. So if you could do that to us, for us.
I'll give you a brief synopsis of that. First, you have to trust yourselves within your own community. And at that point, you can extend out and branch out. When we started the United States of America or the Continental Congress, trust was the major factor.
Sure.
If we're going to do that on a large scale with 2.8 million people, it's going to take us establishing a new systematic approach at addressing their concerns and not trying to change a system that's already in place.
Sure, but
Thank
what
you so
I'd
much.
like for you to do is just communicate that to us in writing, because I think it's going to be, we'll have the ability to let others reflect off of it if we can put it in a practical kind of context.
If you would have the individuals here go to Facebook or just Google DuSable County, you will have all the information on the demographics, the socioeconomic concerns, the political concerns, along with the Illinois State of Illinois constitutional rights to home rule control over the community that you need. Also is a breakdown of the demographics of the economics.
I think we've got that. DuSable County.
Just Google
Illinois.
DuSable County. You'll have the opportunity to research the information there.
All right, thank you. Next person.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Sophia Korchmar. I do work with We Charge Genocide and some other community groups around both policing and anti-deportation work. Thank you to all the panelists and people who have been involved in this conversation. I guess I wanted to just start sort of, you just provided a summary, which I think makes a lot of sense. I think a few things in that summary that stick out to me. First of all, in terms of this conversation about a lack of accountability, right, that means a lot of things. But I think one of the things that it means, and we talked about this earlier this morning, is a sense of no consequences for police officers who abuse their power up to the point of murder, and that our collective complacency with that, like particularly white people, is unacceptable, right? So if that's where we are, and that we also can kind of acknowledge that it is desirable for citizens to have enough power to hold the police accountable in the kind of dynamic that Professor Green described, and we can acknowledge that part of the reason we're having this conversation in the way we are having it is because young people of color who have been directly affected by violence of police have taken this conversation to the street and have been having it publicly, and we are having this conversation in part because of Ferguson, in part because of Rekia Boyd's family, in part because of so many other people. I think it is really incumbent on us to ask, what are the visions of accountability that are being proposed here that are actually coming from young people of color? And in any continuation of this conversation, of this conference, of forums that come out of it, what does it look like to actually ask and to commit to disseminating those visions of accountability, right? Not just in terms of data, but also in terms of the power to act from that. So I kind of originally had formulated this as a question for Lucretia, and I don't know if she's still here or wants to take it. But I kind of want to ask what young folks who are doing this work want from us in this room, because I actually feel like those are the answers, right, that I would like in terms of deciding where we go from here. So I don't know, Lucretia, if you're still here, if you want to speak to that. If not, I would just really encourage in any conversations that go forward from this day, that be the starting point, right? Because I want to ask what folks need in terms of supporting, not just in terms of like, what are ideas, but also where do people need money? And like, where do people need panels to be on to share their visions of what that kind of accountability looks like? So anyway, just to put that out there. Thank you.
Thank you. I can't overemphasize the extent to which we have tried in our particular project, and I think should carry over into other folks and how they address this issue, the involvement of young people. I mean, we elicit their ideas. Many of the things you've heard talked about here actually originated from the mouths of the teenagers who we talk to. They're not necessarily our ideas or our observations even in many cases.
Hello, my name is Dan. I'm part of Young Leaders for Justice, which is part of Chicago Freedom School. And during our sessions a couple months ago, Miriam mentioned something about reformative justice and how reform, I forget either it's reformative justice or reform itself is simply harm reduction, and it's not actually going to change overall. It's more about transformative, actually changing this structure completely, breaking it all the way down and then building it up from the bottom versus just changing something here and there and hoping that the entire process is going to somehow work out overall. So when we're talking about reform and police accountability, we need to look at it from a transformative framework instead of a reformative framework, because we need to transform this entire structure. I'm sure if you've been out on a protest, you've heard that the whole damn system is guilty as hell. And the whole damn system is guilty as hell. So we need to transform the whole system so that we can all become accountable to each other. That's basically it. Yeah.
Do you have any ideas about which parts of the system you would change first and how you might do that? I mean, I hear you, and I think that's a concept that warrants some attention, but it's sometimes better to be a little specific about what you think is even the first priority to change and recreate.
Okay. So as people have mentioned throughout the entire panels today, it's not just a police problem, it's a attorney general problem, and it's also the judicial system problem. Addressing the judicial system is where I would start, and then work my way down from there. But I obviously don't have the resources for that. But I think starting at the judicial system and branching out from there is the place to start.
Okay?
Jackie.
Hi.
I guess I'll just talk. My name's Simon, and I don't know if it's because I missed, well, not missed, I wasn't able to go to the conference yesterday, but it seemed like just everything that we were talking about today, I thought was engaging.
Yeah, that's fine. But it wasn't like really in relation to youth most of the time. It wasn't really like particularly what youths can do and the role of youths and things like that. And I think I was sort of expecting that more. And I don't know if that's because there weren't very many youths on the panel today, but just like thinking in mind about the paper or things to do in the future. I think that's something to keep in mind. It's at least something that I've left wanting at the end.
I think one of the things that unfortunately we weren't able to produce today is the video that we've assembled over the last couple of years of some of the ideas that young people have, some of the specific encounters and experiences that they've had with the police. We had some technical difficulties that prevented us from showing a lot of that, and I think that would have given more youth participation and given you a flavor for how we came up with much of the topical matter that we did and the panel discussions. But I think it's a fair thought that young people weren't present as much as we might have wanted. There's also the question of school schedules and that sort of thing, which limits us a little bit. So,
my name is Chanel Helm, and I'm with several organizations, but I'm with Kentucky Alliance Against Racism and Political Repression, the organization that, I don't want to mess up her name, the young lady with BYP and Project NIA was talking about, as well as WIT, which is a part of Poor People's Economic Human Rights Campaign, and we fight for everybody's economic human rights underneath the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which is why we're in this situation that we're even in the first place. One of the solutions that we definitely need to talk about, and something that she mentioned, is trauma. And I think when we start basing most of the conversations that do not work and sometimes limit us and what we can do, it's based off those institutions. And the same situation that Chief Cook was talking about, how you have the institution over here and then separate institutions within the system compiling whatever data and doing whatever, we still miss out on what we really need to talk about. So as she sat up there and she explained what she experiences, that's one person's situation, and then even the previous day, taking these conversations and these conferences and actually taking them to the people is what we do as grassroots organizers, but that's the way that it's going to get fixed. Having an institution decide what is going to happen with people who aren't even here or even building the table, that's just like faulty construction. I'm not for sure what we're building if we don't build with them. It's just corporate fascism in the entire spectrum. The other thing that I wanted to talk about was losing accountability and the trust factor is actually giving away that freedom that we have. And that's what we really need to talk about. So if we're not talking about history or trauma and those things in respect to what's going on with our children and those children that need to be here, who actually need to be here, the street kids, the ones that are getting kidnapped basically by police, getting their doors kicked in, harassed on the corners, then I'm not, like I said, I'm not for sure what we're trying to build. What we do at WIT is build with people in their situation and empower them. So some of these organizations that we have, yes, they're led by people who are knowledgeable, but they're not led by people who have experience. And so when you have people who have experience and then allow them to become knowledgeable, you build empowerment. So that's something that needs to definitely need to happen. And I think the next time that you have one of these, maybe you need to take it to that neighborhood, whether it's outside, it's in, not in a church, I'm sorry, a little biased, but maybe in a community center or, you know, someone's house or anything like that that makes it more personable. So it doesn't seem like you're sitting on this side of the fence this high and they're sitting on the other side this low without seeing each other.
thank you.
Hi, I'm Mario from Hyde Park. I'm 17. Well, I feel like we be asking the police for to stop harassing us too much. Like right now, we just kind of come up with reasons to keep on asking them, and I feel like we've been asking too long. I think we should just like actually just take action and just like kind of make them, because we asked with the Rodney King situation, and it stopped for a while. Well, it didn't really stop. It went under the radar for a while, and then it come right back up, and we steady asking. And to me, it's not really helping us. It's just showing them that they empowered. I think by asking the police to stop stopping me from doing nothing, it's just like showing like, okay, you asking me stuff, but I'm gonna still be empowered. So we start taking action, start being scared, and just like telling them to stop. It's like asking them to stop, just tell them to stop. Gonna actually be the answer to everything, instead of just, oh, can you stop doing this to me? Or just like, stop doing this to me. I know my rights. It's like, oh, I know this. No, don't stop being scared. Grow and just stop being. That's like how I feel like right now we just asking. I just feel like telling it and like showing action and showing that you bigger than them. Like whatever they do, you ain't gonna fall down to what they doing. Like I'm 17. I seen a lot of stuff with the police. They killed one of my best friends. They stopped me a lot, and they stopped my friends, and I seen a lot. But I'm still showing them that I'm bigger than them, that I'm still be something. No matter how much they stop me. If I'm 35 and rich, they're gonna still stop me because I'm black and I'm from Chicago. I'm always, like I tell Jamie and Chase Flynn, I'm book smart and I'm hood smart. Which means no matter what, I'm always be smarter than the person who think they know about me. That's all I gotta say.
All right, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Lensa Michelle, and I'm the co-founder of Beantown Society, a youth-led violence prevention program in my hometown of Boston. I want to address the solutions piece, and I'm going to try to go through it very quickly because there's a lot of things that I would like to say, and of course we never have time to actually talk about solutions, which is another point I'm about to make. And I'm going to present them in the structure of the 4 I's. And for those who are not familiar with that, it's the 4 systems of transformation: the individual, interpersonal, institutional, and ideological level. I'll start at the individual. First, as individuals, we need to start seeing all of ourselves as social change agents. We operate in a society where we're always waiting for somebody else to do the right thing. We all can do the right thing. And if we come from that perspective, whenever we see injustice happening, whether it's a young person being frisked by a police officer, or if we can hear sounds of cries for help when we walk away, or walking past a homeless person on the street, we can always play a role as a social justice agent. So that's one, as the individual level. At the interpersonal level, which means our network, we need to start having these conversations outside of these classrooms and outside of these forums. And specifically for all the white allies in the room, you need to have these conversations with your peers and with your families. I am a friend to many white allies, and we get into long conversations about systems of oppression, structures of racism, and all the other isms that are interconnected to it. But ask them, have you had this conversation with your parents? And they get real quiet. That's problematic. That's really problematic. Because the very people who perpetuate these systems are never going to do anything different because they're not going to know any better. So we need to change the way we frame the conversation. Also at the interpersonal level, for people of color, we need to stop looking at everybody as the enemy, okay? Because that trauma that we have embedded and internalized inside ourselves, we're passing it on to our next generation. And I know this because I work with young people every day. And they're picking up ideas and ideas about themselves and their identities that didn't come from them, didn't come from inside. The other thing we need to start doing interpersonally is to start having these conversations, as I said before, but to start having it as actively and as in genuinely, just as we would have a conversation about any other kind of issue in the media. I don't understand why I can talk more about the last thing Kim Kardashian did or whatever her name, Jenner's big lips, her whole challenge, more than I can have a conversation about racism and institutions of oppression. Doesn't make sense. We can feel comfortable to talk about that. You can talk about Kylie Jenner's big lips and the challenge that she's setting off to millions and millions of youth in America, but you can't talk about the root of the internalized hate that young people who grew up having big lips had for themselves, or the hate that people of European descent have on black and brown children who have big lips. That's problematic. At the institutional level, we need to start having conversations about racism and institutions of oppression, systems of oppression within the institutions themselves. And when I say this, I'm specifically referring to colleges and universities. This is a great forum and this is a great conversation that's been had at this conference, but it can't just be a conference. These things need to be built into the curriculum of not just the School of Law, not just the College of Arts and Sciences, but in every college and university that exists on this campus. And it cannot be a one-off shot deal. Today we're going to talk about racism when we know that it impacts every aspect of our lives every day. It has to be built into every single curriculum. If you're talking about health systems, you cannot talk about racial justice. That doesn't make sense. You have to talk about it. And then with regards to conferences, I myself have been to many conferences. I've organized many conferences. I've spoke at many conferences. And one of the things that I cannot do anymore is go to a forum and at the last day and the last 2 hours, which usually isn't even the last 2 hours because we're always running behind schedule, that's when we start talking about solutions. The whole conference is about issues that we already know, and the last conversation is about solutions, and we never really get to the heart of it because the last conversation is about solutions. We really need to start having forums and conferences where that's all about the solutions. It's all about, we know what the data is, we know what the demographics are, we know what the systems of oppression are. Let's start working on how to address it. To that end, we need to start making better connections about racism and other systems that impact our lives. This is about housing policy. This is about education. We can talk about the achievement gap, but we never talk about the lack of cultural competency amongst teachers, how that professional development is lacking consistently. We never talk about how there was a history of redlining in Chicago that intentionally isolated and segregated people of color, and that history is still permeating to today. We never talk about that. We never talk about gentrification from the context of cleansing. We never talk about this on a regular basis. We don't build this into every aspect of our lives. And we need to. We need to stop being afraid of that. Because otherwise, we're just going to have another conference like this next year. We're going to raise the same issues again. And we're still going to be asking ourselves in the last hour, what are the solutions?
Well,
At the ideological level, and this really raises all the last three forms of the 4 I's. We need to start talking about the roots of supremacy and imperialism and how that has impacted the structure of the United States. We cannot reform systems that were designed from their beginnings for people to have power over other people. So my request is not about writing up another report. I do a lot of that myself. I work at Tufts University. I have a master's in public policy. I do this work on a regular basis, and I leave there and then I go work with youth in the streets. What I want to talk about is when are we going to actually bring this conversation to the police officers themselves? Get them to come and do a forum specifically with that audience. When are we going to have a conversation with the chief of police and with the mayor and lay out these issues? They're not going to watch the video. We already know what the issues are in that video. They need to know. So these are the kind of things that we need to do, because that will then impact those who have influence and power to actually write policy that is going to affect change. And all of us need to see ourselves, as I said before, as change agents in which we can do it. Thank you.
Thank you. You've said a lot, and I guess a couple of takeaways that I got from your discussion was, first, it's very important, organizations like ours or groups like ours can't be the exclusive promoters of discussion and solutions to problems with young people and police. I would encourage each of you to maybe host a dinner, assemble a group, no matter what the composition of the group. It could be family, it could be friends, it could be colleagues, but assemble a group just to have a conversation about some of the issues that we've talked about here over the last couple of days, and encourage each one of those people to do the same thing. And I can assure you that the discussion will broaden and a lot of people will begin to give it some thought, and we might actually have some real public participation in working through these problems here in the Chicago area. The other thing that a good point I think you made is about where we position the solution discussion in these conferences. It's probably a good idea not to wait until the last day to try and address all the solutions, but perhaps after each panel, actually have a section that's devoted to solutions while things are fresh on people's minds and there's a focus on a certain set of issues, so that we don't wait until the end, as we're doing today, I have to admit, and to also enable people at the conference to participate at various times, because people do leave. Toward the end, people have travel arrangements and that sort of thing. So I think that's actually a very good suggestion. Thank you for it. Anybody else?
Hi. So I had 3 ideas that came to my mind about ways to improve the police relations with our people. In particular, when you talk about the Police Review Board and their method of investigating allegations of misconduct. I worked as an investigator for the Department of Children and Family Services for 10 years, and I will tell you, you can investigate nothing sitting at your desk. You cannot wait for evidence to come and knock on your door, or for someone to pick up the phone and call you and say, I'm a witness, I want to tell you what happened. You have to put on your gym shoes, you have to go out into that community, you have to talk to those people. Sometimes you can talk to them on the day that the incident happened, and sometimes you have to wait. People are not always willing to talk as soon as something happened, when everybody's around and they see who's talking to who. So you have to sometimes wait and go back. But you have a police review board that does not investigate. The Bible talks about people who are willingly ignorant, who you question, do you want to know the facts, when you don't actually go out and try to do a grassroots investigation, not showing up in a 3-piece suit, not carrying yourself in a way that makes you appear as if you're above the person that you're trying to get information from, but to dress down. And then if you're going to have a review board, that review board should look like the community that it works in. Because otherwise you face the same stereotypes that you have with the police themselves. I also want to, so number one, for them to go out into the community and do the investigations. I also want to talk about briefly the Rekia Boyd case, and to remind people that she's not just a 30-second bit on the news. I knew Rekia's older sister. I knew her as a child. I remember when her father used to bring her to church. And we had, in that situation, the hope that something was going to happen, because that person was charged. A trial did occur with that person, but then you had a judge that threw it out. So when that judge comes up for re-election, how many of us are going to remember that judge's name? How many of us are going to write that judge's name down And when we go into our voting booth, look for that judge's name and say, you don't represent the way I feel. You don't represent what I think should have happened in this case. So I'm going to make sure that I circle the appropriate box in order to vote, that I don't want judges like that sitting on the bench. So we also have to do something, was it Sutton? Was it?
Judge Porter.
Okay. So we have to, make sure that we exercise our vote accordingly so that we have people in the judiciary who we can hold accountable. So that's just what I wanted to say.
All right. One of the things that I'd like to ask of you, as someone with investigative experience, I'd like some ideas that you might have about how you can share your investigative skills, maybe in a teaching mode, whether it's young people or others who might be in a position to learn from you and to use those skills to keep everybody accountable.
I'm sorry, could I add one more thing? Because I never hear this talked about when we talk about police and community interaction, because I think it's not known. After having worked with the Department of Children and Family Services for 10 years, I cannot tell you how many times we've had the police call the hotline for vindictive purposes. Here it is, you have a citizen who mouths off to them or files a brutality complaint on them, and how the police will actively try to get this person's children removed.
And what do you think the motives are for doing that?
Vengeance is nothing other than vengeance, nothing other than how dare you challenge me? How dare you say that I assaulted you? I'm going to show you. And I know that as an investigator, I had to have a certain level of integrity to not feel pressured to say, I think that cop is lying.
So you're saying that in retaliation against complaints that a citizen might have filed against the police make blind calls or calls to DCFS
Yes.
to report child abuse?
Yes, and they don't necessarily do it anonymously. Sometimes they want it to be known because the police have a certain amount of inherent credibility, where DCFS will say, oh, well, the police called it in, so it must be true, because we're trained to give the police an objective that they would not be doing this if it wasn't a purely objective motive. We're trained to think that way, and I can tell you, I've personally worked cases where you look and you go, that's not the case. This was not an objective call to DCFS.
Well, thank you for that. It's something we've not heard before.
Sure. Hi, my name is Miriam Kaba. I run an organization called Project NIA. I wanted to say mainly two things. I worry often that we are told in advance what's realistic to be thinking about and what is kind of pragmatic and what it is that we should. Please don't take any photos of me or put me on camera. I don't do that. Thank you. So, that we already have preset kind of the limits for what is acceptable to discuss as it relates to policing or prisons or surveillance or X number of things within society. Like, it's already been normalized to the point where we are to accept that all these things are fixed, they exist, they're historic, they can't be changed. And so everybody comes into rooms kind of already within the bounds of a certain kind of way of thinking. And we're not then allowed to think beyond those things. And I don't think that's done purposely. I think it's done because it's easier to be able to navigate within a world that feels like it has some purchase. You can actually kind of see the end game. And I just want to push us to one of the things that was said on the last panel was kind of like, well, we're not going to overthrow the Police Bill of Rights. Well, why not? This makes no sense to me. So you tell everybody in an audience of about 100 people they're not supposed to even think about the potential of abolishing police unions. Why not? Unions were actually created by somebody. They didn't come out of thin air. They weren't preordained by God. People made that. So people can unmake the thing we made. And I think that I kind of sit through these things always wondering how people in the room are ever going to be able to get to the other side if the other side of that wall, if we can't break down the wall in the first place. So I just want to say that we should consider the fact that we should have no unions for police, that should be a real thing, that we should consider no police bill of rights, that we should consider the end of those things, that we should consider the end of police at some point. While some people want them to be here and think they're valuable and valid forms of social control, other people do not believe that to be the case. And we should have equal purchase of being able to think about those things and argue for those things and fight for those things, right? And so I think it's okay for us to have people on extremes, because extremes help you to be able to consider and have an imagination for what else is possible than the hell we're living through right now. So I want to encourage everybody to be super imaginative about a world without police and a world without prisons and a world without mass surveillance, that those things should also be under the same consideration as the other things we're told are so realistic. To me, it's not realistic that so many young black people are being stopped and frisked and harmed and killed. That's not my reality, right? I don't want that. That's not what I'm looking to be able to tolerate as a casualty of having these other things that other people want and feel protected by. I want those things to end too. So I want to just say at the end that I want you to think about the possibilities of disarming the police and disbanding the police and defunding the police. At the very least, let's defund them. Why the hell do we keep putting more and more and more money into policing to the point where 40% of the operational budget of this city is spent on police? 40%. Meanwhile, we've got mental health clinics completely closed, schools being closed, we've got no hospital ability for people to get health care, we've got a lot of other things that a city budget should be devoted towards. And a budget is a moral document that gives you a compass as to what you think is the priority. And do we think that police are the priority over all these other things I listed? If you go into any community and you ask people what they need, they don't ever tell you first more police. Never. I've not found a black community, a Latino community. I've done those, going around and asking people. They don't tell me, yeah, I want 1,000 new cops. That's really what I'm dying for. They want better schools for their kids. They want transportation that works. They want jobs for their people. They want all this. So we're actually winning if we start focusing on those things to increase the safety within our communities, right? Because, strong communities do make police obsolete. And if we can build up our communities and our internal ways of accountability with each other, we're going to do a lot of work that will help us to end this terrorism that so many of us are experiencing within our communities by the cops. So I just say that for me, the first thing is building on our community level, what kinds of systems of accountability we can have with each other to find ways to crowd out the police in communities that are super over-policed. Because the people in Naperville are living abolition already. The cops are not on every corner. They are not in those schools. They are not harassing those children, okay? And they're living, and they're having safe lives. So the idea that we can't have abolition is ridiculous. Other people are living it in this exact moment right now. They've got the cops in our communities to live abolitionist dreams for themselves. So I think we got to really, we got to push the envelope. We got to be more bold. We got to use our imaginations, and we got to fight. We got to fight. We got to mobilize. We got to build political power, and we also have to make sure Anita Alvarez goes. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you, Miriam. I think your point is well taken, that we need to be in a position to imagine a different universe, different structures, different institutional structures and frameworks, because it's only with that kind of creative approach to problem solving that we're probably going to be able to get past where we are today. We've got time for one more comment.
Yeah.
Young man?
I just want to emphasize that how important it is as people, regardless of color, how important it is that we are tasked at this time with returning humanity back to back to humans. I think as a society, we get caught up in capitalism, we get caught up in numbers and quantity, but I think the charge for us is to remind people about love, about equality, about balance. We have the opportunity to teach police officers, and it goes beyond being a police officer. It's about being a human being, about how to respect other people, other human beings. And I think that that's the very basis of the conversation that we have now. How do you appreciate another human being, regardless of your agenda, regardless of the color, the number, the quantity, the dollar? How do you appreciate another human being? I just want to emphasize how important that is to this conversation. I also want to talk about how this talk is really about the youth, and people talk about, well, I wish there were more youth, and I think that's important. But one of the things that we touched on here was that police end up treating the youth like adults. So when we look at how the police treat adults, we realize that we need to just teach the police how to treat humans, period. Like, we just need to build that experience, of how the police approach humans overall. And I think when you look at the youth in particular, like I was here yesterday and I heard a lot of different experiences. I didn't hear a lot of solutions, but I heard experiences, and I don't know that the youth always know, what they want, know the best thing to do, or they have that solution, but they have their experiences. And being that we're scholars, we're in the institution, we have to be prepared to intake those experiences and try to train them, to vocalize the experiences and be leaders, even if they don't have the solutions. Because once we train them to be outspoken and be leaders, maybe the solutions will come, and then they'll be ready to share their experiences and the solutions. But it's about, as far as us, we have to be prepared to receive it, be prepared to listen, and we also have to become informed of the laws ourselves. And that's something that I have to do more of personally, and I will do more so that I can be available to the youth, because it's about them. And we're still young in this room, but, it gets much younger. So we have to be able to, expand ourselves to reach them, to reach their needs, and to reach their cause. Also, I really think that it's important to, to get back to the idea of somehow policing or watching our own communities. I know that there are organizations and people with intentions and aims to do that, but we have to really spread out who's doing that, and we have to get more involved in doing that, because if the police are, abusing the community, we can't always control the police to tell the police, what to do. We can make recommendations and suggestions, and we can change laws, and we can protest. But at the end of the day, if they don't correct themselves, then we have to be the ones to step up and take care of the community how we, and make it what we would like for it to be, regardless of the gangs, regardless of the drugs, regardless of the money. It's going to take really brave people to really step up and do this. And I think just by taking the time out today and just by being here, we've all shown a sense of dedication to that cause, and we just have to take it a bit further, to organize and really stay in tune with, with what we want to see. And it's up to us, to whether we keep this conversation and this passion and these solutions in our mind once we leave this room, because somehow it's like a vacuum, and we just let all the air out when we leave. But it's up to you personally as an individual to keep this going in your mind, to keep thinking of solutions and keep pushing yourself, to that point to where you can, put one of the youth, that were in the video yesterday, or that were speaking yesterday on the platform, to be able to share their experiences. And finally, I want to touch on I think she left, the young lady yesterday. I just remember her saying that she was a professional mother. I thought that was really critical, and I wish I could hear from more people like that. And she asked yesterday and today, whose interests, are we serving? Whose interests are the police serving by keeping young black males in fear and keeping them, aggressively oppressed and pinned down? If we're serving somebody financially by doing those things, then we need to find out whose pockets, whose bank accounts are we protecting by doing this. And we need to organize financially around this and make sure we're not supporting anything that's financially corrupt, or that's dehumanizing, human beings. That's insane. These are human beings, people. We need to restore that humanity back to the human experience. And I think that all of the young black youth, regardless of money, color, or whatever, they deserve to have, you know, a full life experience just like everyone else. You know, if we were all naked, you know, there wouldn't be any differences. But because there is, you know, that we put value in numbers and clothes and money, you know, these people have to lose their life experience. They have to lose lifetimes, times with family, children, you know, years out of their human experience. And it's very unfortunate, and I'm willing to do what I have to do to eliminate that. So I hope that everyone else is, is here too and willing to extend this past this conversation in this time. Thank you all for listening, and thank you for having this. So yes,
Thank you.
Thank you.
You know, over the past couple of days, we formed a community of people who are interested in a subject matter that affects all of our lives, either directly or indirectly. And being part of this community means that everybody has something to contribute. I agree with the last speaker that it's not up to young people to find solutions to the problem, and that's why we've assembled scholars, we've assembled activists, we've assembled police officers, we've assembled former police officers, lawyers, and others who basically have insight into various aspects of the problems. So I'd encourage you to remain a part of this community by giving us feedback about how we might proceed with many of these issues in a practical kind of way. And with that, you're released. Goodbye.